I think it's safe to say that when it comes to the 1990s, you think of things like Nickelodeon, Pogs, Super Soakers, shoes with lights built into them, Lunchables, and of course, video games. And the two biggest juggernauts in the industry at the beginning was none other than two companies that even if you didn't play their games or own their systems, you still knew the name Nintendo and Sega. These two companies are what people primarily think of when it comes to the console wars of the 90s. And yeah, that makes sense. Both these companies had power levels that were both over 9,000 at the time, and I don't think anyone thought that they could be stopped, much less deposed. I mean, they really were just pumping out game after game on their systems, and even their handhelds were capturing people too. So it was kind of weird when Sony announced that they were entering the gaming market during this time. Many were actually baffled that the people responsible for TVs and Walkmans were going to be essentially bringing a knife to a gunfight, and a lot of people didn't actually think that Sony would be able to stand toe-to-toe against people like Nintendo and Sega. And, well, now 30 years later, on the birth date of the PS1, I think it's safe to say that they did pretty well for themselves. The original PS1 was a landmark in gaming. I mean, this thing was using CDs. A major tech revolution was happening here, and to add to the rise of music and CDs, you had a system that had itself a built-in CD player, giving you that extra boost to want to buy the console. But besides that, the people at Sony had a vision and a direction that they wanted to go. That vision was led by the father of the PlayStation himself, Ken Kutaragi, a man who refused to back down and gave it his all to make the PlayStation a reality. And, well, this was kind of after the fallout between Sony and Nintendo, but he wasn't willing to concede. He truly believed that there was a place for PlayStation in the world of gaming. And again, given what Sony was doing privy to this, well, you can understand why people were worried, but in the end, I think it worked out. The plan for the PlayStation 1 was Kutaragi wanted the arcade experience to be brought home to gamers. And while there were games on Nintendo and Sega platforms that were from the arcade, Kutaragi and his team aimed to create something new to allow this to happen in an easier and more cost-effective way. And so we enter the CD-ROMs, which was a cheaper way than cartridges back then, and to be fair, well, that was going to pique people's interest because people like shiny new things. Another weapon in the arsenal for Sony was them not actually focusing on first-party games, which is kind of insane to think about, because how are you going to sell your brand? How is anybody going to want to play your system without some kind of mascot? I mean, eventually there was, but these kind of things take time, and Sony was kind of pressed to develop this. They knew what they had to do, and thankfully, with the help of third-party companies, it's essentially what helped sell their console and give them a leg to stand on. And let's face it, much like the era with the NES, Sega, and Super Nintendo, third parties helped build the consoles of the 90s. I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong. Mario and Zelda and Sonic the Hedgehog, they're all very popular, they're very well known, but companies that were making things like Castlevania or Mega Man, those were ones that people really wanted to play as well, and they stood out on the consoles that they were on. So, to be honest, Kutaragi wanting to go this route seemed to be the smart choice, because again, it takes time to create an IP, and you don't know if that IP is actually going to work. So going third party was essentially a safety net, a safe bet, if you will. Former president and CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment America, Sean Layden, had this to say about third-party devs helping to build the Sony brand to give them a leg to stand on. We had a very deep partnership with Namco from the start. They were the touchstone in the Japanese market. If you wanted to talk about bringing the arcade into the home, nothing told that story or sold that story better than Tekken and Ridge Racer. But for many developers, this would be a battle in the realm of 3D because, well, many devs weren't used to this type of style that Sony wanted to go for, and that style was polygons. See, Sony really wanted to make the system all about polygon work, and at the time you can understand them wanting to do that because it was very ambitious, it was very different, and different is what can kind of bring people into the product that you're trying to sell. But unfortunately, Sony really just wanted to ditch all of the sprite-based work at the time, and this is something that I feel that was a bad move to try to do. Thankfully, it didn't happen because there are tons of great games on the system that still use the sprite-based work, and they look fantastic even to this day. And to be honest, they look better than a lot of the Polygon games that are out there at times too. But there is room for both on the system, and I think that Sony at one point realized that. You see, if you just got rid of that style completely, then everybody who grew up with games on the NES and the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, well, what's making them gonna come to your new system if you're not gonna do stuff in the old style? Now, again, you don't have to completely just forget about it, but a few games here and there to bridge that and then get people into eventually the Polygon side of PlayStation 1 can work. And I think they did just that. I mean, both styles are incredible and revolutionary for their times. And again, I think some of the games that came out for sprite-based work during the PlayStation 1 era are still friggin' goated. The PS1, in my eyes, was set to be the console that everyone could have. It wasn't a family console like the Super Nintendo. It was the every person's console, really. And they were trying to, well, get the casual people to buy into the system. Maybe the people that just went to arcades, maybe people who dabbled in the original Nintendo when they were younger. But ultimately, I think they did get that audience that they wanted, because throughout the 90s, in so many homes that I visited, I saw a PlayStation sitting in their living room. And these were families that weren't really gamers, or households that you could tell they didn't have kids, and that PlayStation was sitting there connected to their CRTs, and it was kind of crazy to see that. I mean, most of them, the times that I saw, they were a lot of racing games and a lot of sports games, and oddly enough, Tekken 3 was always seemed to be there too, which was kind of crazy, but again, Tekken 3 is a really fun game. So I think in the end, that this was further evidence that Sony knew what they were doing, and they were a force to be reckoned with, that even Nintendo and Sega had to admit and be like, yeah, we need to step up our game because they're killing it right now. For me personally, the PS1 remains my favorite and most influential system of all time. This is where I saw the landscape of gaming truly change. Games could be mature, darker. Voice acting worked its way into the world too, and, well, the arcade experience was coming to the home experience now more than ever, and RPGs had one hell of a run during this era. I'll say for me, games like Metal Gear Solid, Breath of Fire 3, Final Fantasy Tactics, and of course Resident Evil really changed how I experience games. I still remember getting this console on Christmas morning, and never have I ever been so excited to get a video game system before in my life. And as time went on, I got more and more games, or rented a lot of games like kids in the 90s did, and, well, I played whatever I could, especially fighting games, because Sony really did want you to have that quarter experience, and, I mean, yeah, I feel virtually any game you played with this console back then was going to be fun. I always have that feeling that no matter what game you find on the PlayStation 1, because of how revolutionary it was for its time, it was going to capture something for you specifically. Maybe it was the graphics, maybe it was the music, maybe it was the way they're controlled, maybe it was the people that you spent time with. I think this system, because of what it did back then, really kind of just made people realize this is definitely the future. I mean, the hours that me and my friends pumped into games like NFL Blitz, screaming and cheering with each pass, run, and touchdown. Me and my best friend cracking hardcore at Crash Team Racing, trying to 100% it over at his house. The endless hours me and my buddy Josh playing through Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and in fact, virtually almost every Resident Evil on the PlayStation 1. Me and my cousins playing through hours of games like Frogger, Crash Bandicoot. Oh god, the hours of Crash Bandicoot 1 we would play, and even games like Final Fantasy 7, which was mind-blowing for us back then. I mean, it's just insane to think about all these great moments from our childhood, and, well, to be honest, I could talk about this forever and ever, but I don't want this video to run into like a 2-hour thing. So, I'm gonna leave you with one of my favorite PS1 stories of all time. So I remember my father taking me to the local mall, and in that local mall was a KB Toys, and that's a store that I'm sure a lot of us have very fond memories of throughout our childhoods. Anyway, in the store, I was wandering around when my dad waited outside on the bench and looking in to make sure that, you know, nobody was going to kidnap me. To be fair, if anybody tried to kidnap me, they returned me in about 5 minutes because I was annoying as hell as a kid. And I'm actually still kind of annoying as hell even as an adult. So I turned the corner and I saw this game there, and I didn't recognize it at the time, but this game was going to change my life. Maybe not at that moment, but years later. And that game was Resident Evil. Now, for those of you who don't know, I actually am not a big fan of horror movies and gore and death and all that kind of stuff. For whatever reason, it always just kind of gave me nightmares as a kid. But for whatever reason, Resident Evil was a game that I just had to have. Now, again, I didn't know this was a zombie game. It was just that cover that attracted me to it. So I went up to the counter, I asked to buy the game, and they couldn't sell it to me because I was only 9 years old at the time. So I called my dad in, and my dad comes in and he goes, "What's the problem here?" And the clerk goes, "Well, sir, we can't sell this game to your son. We've been told that this is a very mature game and that little kids might not be able to handle it." So my dad just looked down at me, took out the wallet, took out the money, put it on the countertop, and goes, "My son can handle it." So we get in the car, we go home, I run up the stairs, yelling at my dad, saying, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And I go in my room, I turn on the TV, pop that disc into the PlayStation 1, start playing it, and I gotta tell you guys, I couldn't handle it. If you know how the original Resident Evil 1 essentially opens and what happens in that live action cutscene, which again blew my mind seeing that in a video game, you know that it's kind of a scary thing back then because we had never seen anything like this in the world of gaming. And for those of you who don't know me, again, I don't do well with horror. So I kept playing it. Maybe because, my dad spent all that money to buy the game for me. Maybe that's why I did. But ultimately, I stuck with it. And because of that purchase, thanks to my dad, we were able to have a good father-son moment right there. And then eventually that led into what I have as a career now, working with a lot of great people and having an amazing team and meeting other content creators that have the same amount of love for Resident Evil as I do. And because of, honestly, how great Resident Evil exploded, I don't even think I would have gotten into the game if it wasn't for my dad getting me this game back then. Because if I had seen a game about zombies that looked that scary, like when Resident Evil 2 was being heavily advertised, part of me doesn't think I would have bought it, and I maybe never would have joined Row and met all the other people that I've met through this amazing community. So yeah, that is honestly one of my favorite gaming stories, and it's probably one of my favorite PS1 stories because it just gave me so much, and it just showed me as a kid where games were truly going. But the stories don't stop here. To close out this video, I asked some friends of mine to come by and talk about their experience growing up with the PlayStation 1, because I really do feel, as I've explained in this video, that this was where the landscape of gaming changed, and a lot of people have really great stories to talk about this specific console. So, if you guys like what you hear from them, follow their links down below to all the great content that they create. You won't be disappointed. That being said, open up your ears, guys, because here's some more video game stories.
Hello everyone, Mekel aka Mekel Kasanova here, Hawaii's #1 YouTuber. And yeah, I kind of want to talk about some stuff because my buddy, One Big Boss, aka Tony, was like, "Hey Mekel, what are some PlayStation 1 titles that you absolutely recommend, or one in particular that you would recommend people play?" And I got a couple that I would say. I mean, I could say Suikoden 2, but then the HD remake is coming out for that, so like it's gonna have 1 and 2, so why try to track down an expensive copy of this? Have you seen the prices of the original? Way too expensive. I could say this right here, Kudelka, which is one of my absolute favorite games. The only problem with Kudelka is the fact that the combat is incredibly slow, but the voice acting and the stage play like theatrics and just the atmosphere and ambience of this title was like the perfect blend of horror and RPG. But the only thing is, the gameplay is just too damn slow for anyone. Like, I like it, but like, yeah, it ain't for everyone. And I could say Thousand Arms, which is one of my absolute favorite games, an absolute gem. I ain't trying to get canceled because us commentary from this game is from 1999. They ain't gonna hold up in 2024, 2025. So yeah, your boy's not trying to get canceled. But I will say one game that I absolutely recommend all over is none other than Xenogears. This is my absolute favorite game of all time, and I have been playing this since it originally came out in 1998. This game is so freaking phenomenal. And this is coming from someone who is deeply into philosophy, psychology. I'm also very deep into the 7 Hermetic Principles, as well as quantum physics and such. And this touches on all of that. This game is the one game where I come back to it every single year, multiple times a year. And I always am astounded that something this good could be made in 1998 that still resonates over 20 plus years later. They don't make them like this anymore. And yes, we've had Xenosaga Trilogy, which is also phenomenal. You should play it if you haven't, and which is, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it's kind of the unofficial prequel. And there's also the Xenoblade Chronicles series, which, well, now officially ties back into Xenosaga and also mentions Xenogears, if you saw the radio scene. But they don't really hit as hard as Xenogears did. Xenogears was so in your face with just existentialism, being human, what it means to be human, you know, having a very deep combat system, although not properly or fully completely explained, but it was great nonetheless. So if you're looking for an RPG, it can be a little slow at times, and a lot of people hate Disc 2, even though I personally like the exposition dumps of Disc 2. Then this is going to be a phenomenal game for you. One of the greatest RPGs of all time, and one that Square Enix, please either re-release this or give this the 2D HD remake treatment that you gave Dragon Quest, because this is one of the greatest games of all time, and not enough people got to experience this. But that's my thoughts. Xenogears is one of the greatest games ever made. Check that out.
Hey everybody, this is Patrick Brickhouse, owner and producer and host and everything of Retroblast. Real quickly, I just wanted to tell you about my experience with the Sony PlayStation. When I was a kid, I was mostly, in a Nintendo family. So we could only have one console at a time. We had the NES, the Super NES, and then I waited for the N64. But during that time, I remember when the PlayStation was released, I didn't have a way to play it. I held off on it again because I wanted the N64 because, it was awesome. But I had a friend, actually. His name was Joey, and he was a really, really good friend, a sweet kid. And he had a PlayStation, so I used to go over to his house, and that was the first opportunity I ever had to play the PlayStation. And the first games that I ever played were Tekken, and actually before that was Road Rash. So my first PlayStation game that I ever played was Road Rash, and I remember watching the cutscenes were like full motion video, and I remember the music. They had this big projection TV, and got to play that most of the afternoon with him, and then Tekken, and I thought Tekken was incredible. And I remember thinking, playing the PlayStation, how incredible it was, how far ahead of its time it was. And to this day, it's become one of my personal favorite consoles, and I just think it changed the gaming industry. And I'm glad that, I got to have an experience with it when I was a kid, even though I didn't have one. So that's my experience with the PlayStation. Again, Road Rash and Tekken, those are my first two. Played plenty since then, but those are special to me for that reason.
So when I think of the PlayStation 1, the first game that comes to mind, the first series really, is Final Fantasy. I remember the cool kid down the street had a PlayStation 1, and so we all would go over to his place after school got out, and we'd watch him play through a bunch of different games. We watched him play through Frogger, we watched him play through Final Fantasy VII, or some of Final Fantasy VII. I got it in like bits and pieces. But funny enough, the first PlayStation 1 game I played was not Final Fantasy VII, but Final Fantasy VIII. 8 was such a realistic and cool expression to me of a lot of human characters, and they were all teenagers, and I was a teenager, and it was relatable, and it was kind of wild, and the cutscenes were beautiful. It was mind-blowing to me, and the way that in the game you had in-game graphics mixed so beautifully with the pre-rendered cinematic graphics was so cool, mind-blowing, and just like a lot of fun at the time. It's great. I mean, Final Fantasy VIII is one of those that really still holds so well for me. It was a beautiful love story. It had challenging combat, but I don't know. Once I figured out the junction system, we were all right. But it was just so fun, and it was such a good taste of the Final Fantasy experience, and I've been insufferable about it ever since. So yeah, Final Fantasy VIII is definitely one of my favorites on PlayStation 1. I did eventually go back and play through 7, but 8 still just has a little bit of a soft spot for me. My name is Lacey Johnson. I am a video game music YouTuber, and that's my take on the PS1.
Hey, what's up guys? I'm Jared from Avalanche Reviews, and for the longest time I've been known here on YouTube as the survival horror guy. Which, to be fair, there is a good reason for that. I mean, I do love the genre to death, but more than that, I love the console it made its first appearance on. I got my PS1 on Christmas in 1996, and ever since that day, it has been my absolute favorite video game platform by far. Hell, I'd even argue it's flat out objectively the best. I mean, if we're talking landmark releases, the kind that would set the bar for titles being developed even today, we are effectively talking about Sony's PS1. Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Final Fantasy VII, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, these are all titles that would go on to affect the way video games would be made for decades to come, and each one of them launched right here on the PlayStation 1. But if I had to nail down a favorite, which is what I'm supposed to be doing here, I'd have to go with a pick from its astonishingly huge library of JRPG classics. And while I have endless amounts of love for absolute bangers like Chrono Cross, Legend of Mana, and Tales of Destiny, I think I'm gonna have to go with a title that simultaneously has one of the best gameplay experiences and soundtracks of all time. The great, the only Final Fantasy Tactics. Back when this game hit store shelves, like most kids my age, I wasn't very plugged into gaming news, so the very first time that I learned about its existence was seeing it sitting there in a mom and pop rental joint. At the time, me and my family were on vacation, checking out the town we'd soon be moving to for my dad's new job. Me and my brother, both massive Final Fantasy fans since back in the SNES days, were quite literally beside ourselves at the prospect of getting to play a new entry in the series, let alone one that we never even knew existed. The only issue? Well, we had forgotten our one and only memory card, and I can assure you that famously tough encounter at Dorter Trade City takes on a whole new level of intimidation when you know failure means having to start the whole damn game over again. Over the course of the week that we spent there, me and my brother must have put 40 hours into that game, and a majority of it was spent replaying its intro. Now, would we have preferred to not have our entire game wiped every single time we met with some unlucky RNG? Sure, but did we also enjoy the absolute hell out of that experience anyways? Without a doubt. And you know, I think I've taken up enough of your guys' time here, so instead of writing out some final thoughts on the PS1 and how much I love it, I think I'm going to leave that up to myself back in 1996, just a few hours after playing it for the very first time.
Round 2, fight!
As you can see, Justin's into it. It's hard to believe such a small little box can cause so much joy. Look at the controllers.
You win.
Very space age, huh?
So there you have it, guys. From across the landscape of various different content creators, those are some stories about the original PlayStation 1. And honestly, this little system right here, it really was a landmark in gaming that changed everything for so many of us. And because of this, Resident Evil was born on it, and I got to have the friends that I have today. And all the memories I have growing up as a kid, playing with my friends, my cousins, all the amazing memories in this console. This is, by the way, my original PlayStation from back in the day. This is that console. It still works beautifully, it runs perfectly, and I love it, and I pray it never stops working. But I really do love this console and everything that it gave me and everybody else back in the day, because it was really where everything I feel changed. And I don't think a lot of people can deny that. Now, I feel that a lot of people are probably going to ask me, why didn't I talk about the PlayStation 2 and 3 and 4 from talking about the PlayStation brand? And I really wanted to just dedicate this 30-year anniversary to the system that started it all. Because trust me, I have stories for the PS3, PS2, the 4, the Vita, and the PSP. And I will do all those videos another time. But I also have a lot of other stories to talk about for the PlayStation 1. So if you guys aren't following me on Twitch, make sure you are doing that, because that's where I talk about a lot of stories, and I will turn those stories into videos for here on the channel if you guys want to see that. So let me know down in the comments below if you want to see stuff like that. And also tell me your favorite PlayStation game or PlayStation memory. It could be with any of the consoles throughout any of the time periods. Let me know down in the comments below. So with that being said, guys, please thumbs up and subscribe, because it's free. In this day and age, three's a damn good thing. So this could possibly be my last video of the year, and if it is, I just want to thank everybody that has been supporting me all throughout this year. There's some changes here on the channel that were really good. We're starting to do things a little bit differently, and I've got a lot of plans for next year that are already in motion. Guys, this is really going to be a big year in 2025, I feel, and I'm going all out, and I'm really hoping that you guys join me for what's to come. Stay tuned for also on the community tab on YouTube here, because that's like where I post stuff, and I just posted a poll recently talking about some new ideas that I'd like to try out in the future. So again, thank you guys for all the love and support. Thank you to my friends who took the time out of their busy schedules, especially during the silly season, to help me to make this video. I greatly appreciate you guys, and I appreciate all my followers and subscribers here. So with that being said, I'm One Big Boss, and I'll see y'all next year. Take care and have a good one. Hey guys, thanks for watching. As always, when you comment on one of my videos, it helps out big time, and also helps by giving a thumbs up and making that video and the channel be seen itself, and it also makes me know what you guys want to see here on the channel. Make sure to follow me on all my socials to keep up on my newest videos, and also on Twitch and TikTok. I stream there, so the links are all down below in the description. Appreciate it, guys. Until the next time, be safe and have a good one.